Hello, Rick here with an index on a fantasy race with a science fiction twist, the multi-dimensional travelling Illithid, also called Mind Flayers from Dungeons & Dragons lore. A quick disclaimer here, D&D by its very nature, especially in its current edition, is designed to be easily tailorable from campaign to campaign, so any lore for any source is malleable, and only true if you want to use those vanilla details. For this reason, I will be looking into their, quotes, official lore and common traits as depicted in the Forgotten Realms, 5e and Spelljammer to build a basic picture of them from biology to history and culture. With them, it's all about the brains. Specifically, they eat brains. Upon doing this, they absorb their memories and understand some personality traits from the victim, but the Mind Flayer doesn't necessarily reflect that absorbed person in any way, although continual consumption of a specific humanoid type might start to imbue that Mind Flayer with those qualities, leading to a slight variation in cultural influence among different colonies. A healthy Illithid has a glossy sheen to its skin, and they need to consume a sentient mind at least once a week to remain healthy, from feeding on the energies of thought, more than the nutritional value of the grey matter itself. Not only do they feast on brains, but they have very powerful and persistent psionic powers that allow them to control vast quantities of Thralls. Doing this, they managed to rise to power and build a multi-dimensional empire spanning numerous worlds. At its height, it even became a threat to the outer planes, those realms that were governed over by deities and other godlike beings. They dwelt in the astral space upon vast fleets of nautiloid vessels, dreadnoughts and space colonies. From these bioorganic vessels that resemble large conch shells or Fibonacci spirals, they could pierce the veil between dimensions and cross easily from one realm to the next, making them not only an interstellar but a multidimensional power. Alongside their ships, they established colonies on worlds that they had managed to usurp control of by enslaving the population. In the Spelljammer setting, a generally more sci-fi orientated focus on traversing space, they created a Thrall species called the Ortlings to shepherd and feed off. Originally a sentient species in their own right, the Illithid did what they do and overtook the entire society, making them cattle. As the name suggests, they live on comets and asteroids in the solar system's Oort clouds. Another common tactic was to set up a vacant ship to attract salvagers or the curious to acquire more Thralls to be from the poor investigative crews of other vessels. But, as with all empires, one dominated species that they bred to serve them, the gith, were so efficient as slaves that they eventually grew resistant to the Mind Flayer's abilities with natural telepathic and telekinetic powers of their own. Thus they rebelled. In less than a year, the gith tore apart the Illithid Empire and continued to pursue and harry the Mind Flayers even millennia later. The Mind Flayers took shelter on the material planes and planets, isolated from each other and losing many nautiloids to the gith, cutting off their easy access to other dimensions. The only Illithid that survived were the ones who fled deep underground, into the Underdark, places far from the astral skies that they once ruled. So complete was the gith's rebellion that the Illithid were almost made extinct. In the Forgotten Realms, they arrived around 12,400 years ago from their colony on Glyth, the ringed sixth planet of the solar system of that setting. Because of this near-complete revenge from the gith, the Mind Flayers lost much of their history, and now many questions remain concerning their origin. They know they are ancient, predating most other species of the universe, but so too claim many other races of Dungeons & Dragons lore. One theory states that they came back through time, which is why no one can find their place of origin and why their history may be both long but conflicting with the claims of being the first. The most likely origin, though, is that they are from the Far Realms, beyond the known crystal spheres that make up the edges of the universe. This plane of existence beyond the confines of the multiverse is a dimension where physics and the natural laws are unlike anything experienced in our understanding, our material plane. It has powerful psyche and physical warping effects on beings that spend too long there, and certainly their aberrant forms match up with descriptions of Lovecraftian horrors witnessed by those who have also entered into the far realms. The Mind Flayers are genderless and have a parasitic life cycle and share a hive consciousness alongside their own intellect. They begin by spawning a clutch of eggs, once or maybe twice in a lifetime, which are then incubated in the brine tank of the elder brain. We'll circle back to that in a minute. The eggs hatch into tadpoles that feed on each other and scraps of brain fed to them for around 10 years before they are ready for the next stage. They are then taken from their tank and presented to a captured slave or thrall of any compatible species. If you're squeamish with eye stuff, avert your gaze for 10 seconds, because that is how they enter the victim's skull to consume the brain. As they grew, they replace the host's mind in a process called ceremorphosis, and they anchor to the brainstem. The body then mutates into a new Mind Flayer, sprouting 4 tentacles from the face, a process that takes around a week. This is the life cycle of most Illithid, who live for around 120 to 125 years. However, if it has 6 tentacles, it is regarded as an Illithid, a noble devourer. This is a more powerful Mind Flayer, who will eventually leave the colony to found its own, as they were not bound to the hive mind of the elder brain. The Illithid will then work to establish its own colony, and when it reaches sufficient size, it will evolve into a new elder brain, thus cementing a new hive mind. Tadpoles that do not go through ceremorphosis, or that aren't cannibalized by other tadpoles, will become an Illithocyte or a Neothelid, an abomination to the Mind Flayers. Such a being would grow into a wild, ravenous worm, and as such it was to be killed before it became a threat. Alongside their own kind and their thralls, they often wove their psychic energies to form various other serving creatures, such as the Intellect Devourer, a literal brain on legs that can also communicate telepathically. These were used to guard, patrol, and lure people into their domain. They would also commonly alter simple creatures, such as rats, to serve as scouts by endowing them with psionic powers linked to the elder brain. There are also rare instances of renegade Illithid, such as most Alhoon, an undead Mind Flayer, but due to the overpowering hive mind of the elder brain, such instances of true independence were very rare. The Illithid could speak Undercommon and Deep Speech, the languages of the Underdark, their new lair, and the Far Realms, possibly their old. However, as they used telepathy to talk, images and feelings worked better than verbal dialogue to convey meaning. Their written language was Qualith, which looked just like 4 lines, but it was imbued with the writer's psionic power, so viewing it replayed the writer's intent in the mind. Currently, they are far more hostile, xenophobic and paranoid than they were as a spacefaring power, although they were still evil even then. This is probably in response to the loss of that empire, the pervasive presence of the hostile denizens of the Underdark, and the continual hunt from the gith that still search to finish their eradication of the Illithid millennia later. There are still some Mind Flayers that are spacefaring, with their own Nautiloid or Spelljammer starships, and not all are completely hostile. As their entire culture was once proficient in planar travel and dimensional hopping, their perspective on deific beings was somewhat different from those bound to one plane of existence, and as such they didn't really have a religion centered on a god or any other being, as in their history they had visited many of these dimensions and saw the inhabitants as just that, resident species. And if they were from the far realms, beyond creation, then how must they view these other beings bound by inferior laws of physics? Dead Mind Flayer brains, however, are harvested by their kin and fed to the Elder Brain in a way to preserve its memory and knowledge. They generally did follow two ideals, though: the pursuit of Il-Sensine, ultimate knowledge, and secondly, Manzikorian, the preservation of perfect memory. But different colonies interpret even these in different ways, some all but making these ideals into literal presences in the hive mind. Even ideals get weird when you're psychics, it seems. For the most part, the Illithid are dangerous and powerful entities that currently build deep underground networks of hives while amassing thralls to prepare for a time when they can reclaim their self-righteous empire. However, their perilous existence is maintained as much by secrecy and discretion, so their efforts are tempered by the fear of being discovered and eradicated, especially by the gith. This leads many to be spiteful and cold-hearted, being caught in between their efforts to dominate and to hide. Thanks for watching this index on the Mind Flayers of Dungeons & Dragons. Although in most instances a fantasy race, there was just such a strong sci-fi element to them that I couldn't resist. And apparently neither could a lot of you, according to the last vote. Speaking of, this time we're turning our attention from something slimy to fuzzy, with either choice being from the cat-like Cation species of Star Trek or the feline Zygarians of Star Wars. Let me know which one we should look at for the next index, and until then, thank you for watching this one. I'll see you next time. Thanks again, I've been Rick, and goodbye.